Hello, and welcome back to my channel. Today I am very excited to be starting my Hermann Hesse themed month because the 9th of August 2022 will be the 60th Jahrzeit death anniversary of my second favorite writer, Hermann Hesse. I'm spotlighting him here on my YouTube channel and on my blog. I already started on the 1st of August on my blog, which I'm going to be featuring here, fleshing it out a little bit, just basically a brief biography of his life, and no means an exhaustive biography, but just, kind of in a nutshell, important stuff like that. And I said he's been my second favorite writer since I was a teenager, and I've lauded him on many previous videos. It's just his work really, speaks to my soul. He's one of those writers who, feels like a close personal friend instead of just, a literary idol or someone I admire or someone whom I enjoy reading, because, we have so much in common in our own personal lives. And I have, seen him being featured here on BookTube in a number of recent videos, particularly his breakthrough 1919 novel, Damien. And I feel like I could bring, something a little bit more personal to it because, I've known about him for a really, really long time, like 28 years almost. And, so I'm basically, speaking as an elder who's, loved him for a lot longer than some other people have been alive. And so I'm basically, speaking with a lifetime, almost lifetime, perspective of him, in addition to, deeply personally connecting with him. I'm obviously not to throw shade on other people who are a lot younger than I am, or who are, just recently coming to him, because obviously, it takes all types to, like a book and appreciate a writer and such like that. But it's just, when you've had so much invested in him for, such a long time, and you personally deeply connect with him, it's just such a different experience than, oh, Name recommended this book and I thought I'd check it out and here's what I thought about it and here's what happens in the book, instead of oh, this deeply, personally touched my life, and I started finding out more about the writer, and I started loving his books even more because we have so much in common in our personal life. So anyway, enough rambling already. Let's just get down with it. And so Hermann Karl Hesse was born in Calw, Germany, in the Black Forest on the 2nd of July, 1877. His parents were Maria Gunder, who lived from 1842 until 1902, and Johannes Hesse, who lived from 1847 until 1916. Because his father was a Baltic German from Estonia, which was then part of the Russian Empire, Hermann was thus born with both German and Russian citizenship. And as someone who loves younger men, I love that his mother was older than his father. Usually we see it the other way around, like some much older dude marrying a younger woman. And I love it when the tables are turned like that, just particularly when these are people I already like and admire. He had 8 siblings, 3 of whom died in infancy. His half-brothers were Theodor, lived from 1866 to 1941, and Karl Isenberg, lived from 1869 through 1937, from their mother's first marriage. And his full siblings, who lived into adulthood, were Adela, 1875 through 1949, Maria, 1880 through 1953, and Johannes, who went by Hans, from 1882 until 1935. From an early age, young Hermann exhibited precocious talents and great creativity. By the time he was 4 years old, he was already writing poetry and drawing thoughtful pictures, not just, simple, basic, childhood scribbles or simple, juvenile, poetry. This was, very deep, beyond his years, which is yet another thing I relate to with him. And he demonstrated a very passionate, headstrong spirit. In addition to having intellectual, unconventional parents who nurtured his talents, he was also allowed full access to the library of his scholarly grandfather, Hermann Gundert, and drew great creative inspiration from his beautiful hometown. In 1881, the Hesses moved to Basel, Switzerland, and received Swiss citizenship the next year. Hermann began attending his missionary parents' boarding school, Knabenhaus, in 1885. Then, in 1886, the family returned to Calw, where Hermann continued his education. In 1890, Hermann transferred to a Latin school in Göppingen so he could prep for Württemberg's state examination. Students who passed this exam were entitled to a full or partial scholarship. Hermann's father acquired Württemberg citizenship on his behalf, which meant he lost his Swiss citizenship, and obviously, citizenship of certain towns and countries, it's a very complicated matter, particularly in those old days, a topic far beyond the scope of this simple biography in a nutshell. After Hermann passed the exam in 1891, he enrolled at Maulbronn Monastery's Protestant Theological Seminary. However, his interest in a religious career quickly faded, and he fled in March 1892. He wanted to be a poet or nothing else. A day after his escape, he was caught in a field. Hermann fell into a depression and began having violent fights with his parents, whom he had previously enjoyed a very cordial, friendly relationship with. 2 months after his escape from Maulbronn, He attempted suicide. He then was sent to a mental hospital near Stuttgart, where he worked in the garden and taught mentally disabled kids. Hermann wrote an angry letter to his father in September 1892. At the end of 1892, he left the institute and enrolled in a gymnasium in Cannstatt. He passed the one-year exam in 1893, but soon dropped out of school and started an apprenticeship with a bookseller in Esslingen am Neckar. This apprenticeship lasted all of 3 days. In summer 1894, Hermann began a mechanic apprenticeship in the tower clock factory Perot and Calv, which lasted 14 months. This work didn't speak to his mind, heart, and soul either, and he began a new bookseller apprenticeship in October 1895 in Tübingen. And I'm showing you a photograph of the bookstore which he apprenticed at. It's still standing to this day, and hopefully one day, God willing, I will be able to visit it and many other, places that were significant in Hermann Hesse's life. At the antiquarian bookstore Heckenhauer, Hermann thrived. Not only did he enjoy working with these precious old books, he also had the chance to further his education privately at the end of each workday. On Sundays, his day off, he filled his time with reading, and who wouldn't want to work in an antiquarian bookstore, particularly if you love books and reading, like many of us here on BookTube and AuthorTube do. That's just a total dream job, and hopefully one day I would have enough money to afford some of these beautiful precious old volumes in any antiquarian bookstore. It's just something one of my dream things on my bucket list. When he finished his apprenticeship in October 1898, Hermann continued working at Heckenhauer as a sales assistant. During this time, he began publishing poems and stories, some in collections, some independently. Sadly, he didn't achieve commercial success from these early first forays into literature, but he did have some, early backers and supporters who helped him get noticed more and have more publishing opportunities, which eventually led to becoming a full-time novelist and doing breakthrough work. But again, that's a topic for an entirely different video. In autumn 1899, Hermann moved back to Basel and began work at another antiquarian bookstore, Reichsche Buchhandlung. I'm sorry if I'm butchering the pronunciation. Usually my German pronunciation is a little bit better when you're reading fast or words you're not familiar with. Sometimes you do tend to slip up even if you do pronounce German properly in most other circumstances. In Basel, his intellectual, artistic, and spiritual life began reawakening. And now you're seeing a picture which is a view of Basel from the Rhine. It's a beautiful, beautiful country. One of many things I would love to visit someday would be Switzerland, because of Hermann Hesse spent much of his life there, and also the graves of Charles Chaplin and his final wife Una are also in Switzerland. Just many, many things I want to visit in that beautiful country if I'm able to go there someday. In 1900, he was released from military service on account of poor eyesight. He suffered from amblyopia, lazy eye, for the rest of his life, along with headaches and nerve pain. That's yet another thing I can relate to. I'm wearing scleral contact lenses right now after I, take them out at night, and before I put them on in the morning, I do wear eyeglasses. I've had, bad eyesight since first grade. I must have been at 6, maybe 7 years old. I forget which age exactly I first, started wearing glasses. And without these scleral contacts, I'm practically blind in my right eye. That's just has much, much worse vision than my left eye. Even without the contacts or glasses, I can still see pretty well out of my left eye. And I also have been, having, chronic headaches since my junior year of high school. They were triggered by my stressful experience, that whole twisted nightmare of a year. But anyway, that's just, and yet another thing which personally relate to him about, and makes him feel like a kindred spirit and a close personal friend, not just a favorite writer. Hermann traveled to Italy in March 1901 and stayed until May. He visited Milan, Genoa, Florence, Bologna, Ravenna, Padua, and Venice. After his return to Basel, he started working at the antiquarian bookstore Wattenwil. And you're seeing another photograph of him right now. This is courtesy of the Dutch National Archives. Even though it's an older photo in public domain territory, you're still required to do a thing acknowledging the source of it. In 1904, he published his first novel, Peter Commensend. From this point on, he was a full-time writer. Also in 1904, he married his first wife, photographer Maria Bernoulli, who came from a famous family, and she lived from 1868 until 1963. And I love that she was 9 years older than him, a dude after my own heart, although his second and a third wives were much younger than he was. His first wife was older, and that's just totally awesome. I really will, hopefully, if I merit a husband, I will have a younger man myself. I just, love younger men. They had 3 sons: Bruno, 1905 to 1999, Hans Heinrich, who was called Heiner from 1909 until 2003, and Martin, 1911 through 1968. And the first two sons, Bruno and Heiner, became artists of various types, and Martin, the youngest son, became a photographer. I'll leave a link in the description box to a website featuring his photography. Many of these photos are of his family, including their ancestors, and like beautiful, like interesting, like little scene pictures of his father, and just like really, really cool, interesting historical subjects. So check that out if you guys are interested. The marriage wasn't a success, and Hermann's creative life also suffered. To try to recover, he traveled to the Far East in 1911, so basically like India, Ceylon, which was what Sri Lanka was known in those days, Indonesia, which was a Dutch colony at the time, Sumatra, Borneo, and Burma, and like pretty much like most of these places were under colonial rule, so they might not have all had like the modern names we're familiar with. And I did recently read a nice collection of his nonfiction writings. He wrote about this trip to the East. It was really, really interesting, and there was also like a really long novella-length story at the end of it. So just yet another wonderful thing. I highly encourage you guys to check out his nonfiction as well as his fiction, because so much of his personal life strongly informs his stories. And obviously, you don't need to know everything about an artist's personal life to enjoy like the novels or the paintings or like the record albums or things like that. But it really does help to lend a greater dimension, like, oh, that's where this comes from. Oh, now I really understand why he was writing about this, or that's what strongly influenced that the most. So it's just like a whole new like wonderful like connection you have with a writer when you know about his personal life. Though he got his writing mojo back from this trip to the Far East, he unfortunately couldn't save his marriage. He and Maria eventually permanently separated, and they divorced in 1923. In 1924, Hermann regained his Swiss citizenship and lost his German citizenship. That same year, he married Ruth Wenger, who lived from 1897 until 1994, who had first sent him a fan letter about Peter Commonson when she was 14 years old, and they continued corresponding but didn't meet in person for a long time after that. Like, obviously they had a big age difference, but this wasn't like creepy grooming, because they obviously didn't meet until they were grown-ups and didn't even like have a whiff of like thinking about romantic relationship until then. And as they didn't even like really have a romantic relationship, as you'll soon discover, because they lived in different houses most of the time, like several hundred kilometers apart, and they never even slept together, so the marriage wasn't consummated. So this was like definitely not like a romantic or sexual connection they had. It was just like, well, who knows what was going on, but obviously this wasn't like the typical reasons for marriage and all. Obviously it was a big mistake, and they divorced in 1927. Hermann began cohabiting with art historian Ninon Dolbein, née Auslander, who lived from 1895 until 1966. In 1927, and married her in 1931. They settled in Montagnola, which overlooks Lake Lugano, and I'm going to be inserting here like a beautiful panoramic picture of it. This was just a beautiful place, and they lived in a large, beautiful house, which is like now a house museum, one of many other things I want to see when I'm in Switzerland. Maybe I can have a future video and blog post talking about this lovely house in more detail. It's just like a wonderful place to like live and like look out at this beautiful landscape. If you're writing, it gives you even like greater inspiration for your work, and kind of like helps make you happy if you've been like struggling with depression like Hermann Hesse did through much of his life. Though he never openly expressed anti-Nazi views, he did strongly speak out in support of Jewish writers and other writers being persecuted, and his third wife Ninon was Jewish herself, although obviously he wasn't, and he never converted. But this is, sometimes like interfaith marriage can work if you both, like know going in, you're not trying to like, convert one another and respect one another's like sides and such like that. German newspapers stopped publishing his articles in the mid-30s, and his work was classified as undesirable in 1936. None of his books were ever banned or burnt, however, and some of his books even came out in new editions during the Third Reich, which a lot of people might have a mistaken view, because like he was against the Nazis and such like that. They must have been burning and censoring his books as well, but no, that didn't really happen, even though like they had like classifying him as undesirable. His final novel, The Glass Speed Game, was published in 1943, and he won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1946. He continued writing short stories and poems, but didn't begin any new novels. During the last 2 decades of his life, his major literary focus became letter writing, and here you're seeing a photograph of his typewriter. It's been like a long time since I've been able to use a typewriter, but someday, God willing, I would love to buy a typewriter for myself, just like have fun like doing things, because it uses a different part of your brain than when you're typing on a computer. I would love to have a Remington portable. They came in all sorts of beautiful different colors, like purple, red, teal, dark blue, some of my signature colors. Hermann received about 35,000 letters, over his professional lifetime. And just like dear Stan Laurel, answered the bulk of these letters personally. He felt it was a moral obligation to write to anyone who'd taken the time to write to him. And I'm reading on the German Wikipedia recently, I believe 17,000 or so of these letters have currently been accounted for, and hopefully someday they will be published in an archive or in a book. They're also related to dear Stan Laurel, my favorite comedian of Laurel and Hardy. There's a nice website showcasing all these letters he wrote to people and the responses he got. So I really would love to see a project like that for Hermann Hesse as well. In December 1961, he caught the flu and had trouble recovering. Unbeknownst to him, he had had leukemia for a long time. He received several blood transfusions, but they weren't enough. Hermann died of a stroke in his sleep on the 9th of August, 1962, aged 85, and was buried in the San Abbondio Cemetery in Gentilino. And I also forgot to mention his third wife, Ninon, was the love of his life. She was, I think, 18 years younger than he was, but they had a genuine love match despite the large age gap and the religious difference. Sometimes these things really do work out, even though it seems like on paper this wouldn't be a good idea. She was his eyes when he got even worse eyesight towards the end of his life, and she helped with transcribing his work and reading things to him and just helping him with writing. So, and she also was instrumental in getting his work published in new editions and such, and just getting critical perspectives and all the wonderful things associated with this great literary giant she was associated with and married to after his death, really helpfully managing his estate. And so this was just a wonderful relationship. I would love to read more about this amazing woman. Unfortunately, I don't really know too much about any of his wives, but obviously no time like the present to start researching more about a person you love. And so thank you very much for listening to the end. Hopefully I didn't go too off topic or ramble too much. My next video about Hermann Hesse might be about what he means to me, or start reviewing some of his books. I'm not quite sure yet, but if you have not already, please consider subscribing. And I do love seeing comments from people so I can get to know more about my subscribers. And thank you again for watching. It really means a lot to me to have people supporting my channel. And hello to all of my new subscribers. So see you guys again very soon. Thanks. Bye.